هموطنان عزیز، بینندگان گرامی، سلام بر شما. در برنامه امروزمون گفتگوی اختصاصی داریم با آقای پروفسور ریموند تنتر، عضو پیشین شورای امنیت آمریکا. هموطنان عزیز، بینندگان گرامی، سلام بر شما. در برنامه امروزمون گفتگوی اختصاصی داریم با آقای پروفسور ریموند تنتر، عضو پیشین شورای امنیت آمریکا. آقای تنتر در حال حاضر رئیس کمیته سیاست ایران و همچنین رئیس کمیته آمریکایی حقوق بشر هستند. پروفسور تنتر استاد دانشگاه میشیگان هم هستند و همینطور محقق ارشد در انستیتوی واشنگتن برای خاور نزدیک. آقای تنتر تاکنون 6 کتاب در خصوص سیاست ایالات متحده در خاورمیانه، عراق و ایران تحریر و منتشر کردند. آخرین کتاب منتشر شده پروفسور تنتر عنوانش هست شورشیان عرب و مخالفان ایرانی. اکنون قیام‌های دنیای عرب و سلسله قیام‌های مردم ایران دریچه‌ای را برای دولت‌های غربی به طور عام و آمریکا به طور خاص باز کردند تا سیاست خود را که تعامل با رژیم ایران است تغییر دهند و در عوض به سوی حمایت از مردم ایران سوق دهند. اوباما باید از ایرانیان تبعیدی حامی سازمان مجاهدین خلق پشتیبانی کند تا راه دموکراسی خواهی تا مقصد میدان آزادی در تهران تسهیل شود. مقامات آمریکایی باید بعد از لغو نامگذاری مجاهدین و در پرتو حمایت روزافزون از آنها در کنگره و تقویت موقعیت بین المللیشان سازمان مجاهدین خلق را که در سرنگونی حکومت شاه در سال 1979 نقش ایفا نمود به رسمیت بشناسند. این به نفع آمریکاست که با سازمان مجاهدین همسو شود تا این پیام به رژیم ایران فرستاده شود که تمام گزینه‌ها بر روی میز است، من جمله گزینه تغییر رژیم. به نفع آمریکاست که با وجود بنبست هسته‌ای و حمایت رژیم از تروریسم در عوض به ندای مردم ایران که از حنجره اپوزیسیون مشروع آنها برخاسته گوش فرا دهد. پیروزی‌های مجاهدین در دهه گذشته ثابت کردند که آنها در طرف صحیح تاریخ قرار دارند، اما سیاست غلط آمریکا سد راه آنها شده است. اگر آمریکا در کنار اپوزیسیونی بایستد که حکومت آخوندها را طرد نموده، فرایند تغییر رژیم به دست مردم ایران تسریع خواهد شد. رژیم ایران بیش از هر چیز دیگری نگران بقای خودش است و استنباط رژیم ایران از سازمان مجاهدین خلق این است که این سازمان یک تهدید استراتژیک است و بنابراین از آن هراس دارد. در برنامه امروزمون می‌خوایم درباره نظرگاه‌های آقای تنتر درباره مسائل خاورمیانه، ایران و همینطور مقاومت ایران صحبت کنیم و همینطور در مورد آخرین کتابشون. آقای تنتر، تشکر می‌کنم از حضورتون در استودیوی سیمای آزادی و شرکتتون در این گفتگو.
It's my pleasure.
می‌خواستم ازتون خواهش کنم اگر که بشه در شروع صحبتمون بگین که از چه زمانی مشخصاً و به چه علت مسائل مربوط به ایران توجه شما رو بیشتر جلب کرد و تحقیقاتتون رو به اون اختصاص دادین.
Well, I worked at the White House in the Reagan-Bush administration in 1981 to 1982. And in June of 1981, I noticed that some 500,000 Iranian mujahideen were demonstrating in Iran against the Islamist takeover of the Iranian Revolution. And I said, who are these people? And I've been asking this question now from 1981 until 2013. This is a very fundamental question of how the United States can be opposed to the Islamist regime while at the same time not coming to grips with the nature of the pro-democracy movement in Iran. I don't use the word Iranian opposition if I can help it. I use the word the pro-democracy movement in Iran. And that's what I think the Iranian Mujahideen stand for.
Yes. آیا کمیته سیاست ایران هم در همین رابطه تشکیل شد و از چه سالی تشکیل شد؟
The Iran Policy Committee was established in 2003, and it was an idea I had that it was necessary to have a think tank produce academic studies that would determine whether or not the claims of the Iranian Mujahideen were valid, an academic study that would look at the facts. You see, the facts are stubborn. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but everyone is not entitled to their own facts. So the Iran Policy Committee, the IPC, tries its best to assess the validity of the allegations for or against the Iranian Mujahideen and some of the claims of the Iranian Mujahideen, whether they are validated or not.
آقای تنتر، اجازه بدین که صحبتمون از آخرین تحول سیاسی که در ایران بوده، یعنی به اصطلاح انتخاباتی که رژیم حاکم بر ایران برگزار کرد. شما در این کتابتون اشاره کرده بودید که تفاوتی هست بین انتخابات در کشورهای بهار عرب که دارن نزدیک میشن به نمونه انتخاباتی که در کشورهای غربی برگزار میشه با اون چیزی که در ایران اتفاق میفته. ارزیابیتون از آخرین انتخاباتی که رژیم ایران برگزار کرد چی هست؟
I think the election reflects the weakness of the Iranian regime because there's now even a greater split among the elites that run the country. The clerical regime is coming apart at the seams. It lacks popular support, and there's infighting among the top leadership about who will rule. Just like every war must end, every dictatorship must come to a close. And when the dictatorship of the Islamist regime comes to an end, it will come crashing down just like the ones that were military autocrats in Europe in 1988-89, 1991, came crashing down just like the ones in the Arab world came apart at the seams. So I suspect that lacking popular support, the Iranian regime will also fall quite dramatically, but there's a need for some kind of a push from the West in order for that to happen. In other words, the revolution will begin in Tehran, but it has to have some kind of a signal from the Western countries that it's okay to go out in the street and demonstrate against this religious dictatorship.
در مورد روحانی که در حال حاضر به عنوان رئیس جمهور رژیم ایران انتخاب شده، همچنان که خودتون میدونید برخی کشورهای غربی، برخی جناح‌ها و گرایش‌ها به هر حال اون رو مدره خطاب میکنن و چشماندازی رو برای تغییر در ایران با اون متصور میبینن. شما که در این سالها تحقیقات زیادی کردید درباره هویت رژیم حاکم بر ایران، این رو چطور ارزیابی میکنید و آیا اصولا در این رژیم فرد میتونه استقلال عمل داشته باشه؟
Well, foreign offices in London, Paris, and the United States have been engaged in a fruitless, vain search for a moderate. First, and this always has to be a moderate within the context of the Iranian constitution, within the regime, in other words. First, Rafsanjani, Ayatollah Rafsanjani was supposed to be a moderate. And he didn't moderate. He liberalized the Iranian economy and turned, as you may know, it was called a popcorn economy because he, in effect, distributed popcorn to all of his relatives. And that's what he thought, that's what liberal democracy means. Well, that's not liberalization in the Western sense of the term. Then Khatami was supposed to be the moderate within the regime. Then Mousavi and Karoubi, and now Rouhani is the moderate within the regime, working with people like Mousavian. So I would argue that if you are within the regime, by definition, you are not a moderate. You are not going to find a moderate within the Iranian regime. I was on France 24, France 24, debating this question a couple of weeks ago. And the issue came up, well, Rouhani is a moderate. And I said, no, He was 16 years as head of the National Security Council. He was Khamenei's representative for a large number of those years on this council. He has the support of all kinds of people who are not themselves moderate, including Rafsanjani, including Khatami. And Khamenei was not able to stop him. That's why the election engineering failed. Khamenei did not want a repeat of the 2009 riots and demonstrations. And so Khamenei had no choice but to accept the outcome.
فکر می‌کنید این شکست خامنه‌ای که اشاره می‌کنید در انتخابات و مهندسی انتخاباتش چه بازتاب‌هایی به دنبال خواهد داشت برای خود رژیم؟
Well, Khamenei is in a weakened position. He's been weaker and weaker. Since in 2009, Khamenei supported Ahmadinejad, and that began the disintegration of Khamenei's legitimacy as supreme leader. And 2013 aftermath accelerates that delegitimization of Khamenei as supreme leader. Now he's just one of the principalists, like the five Larijani brothers. They were not able to effectively do anything to stop Rouhani from emerging. The mayor of Tehran, I call him the carpet man, the carpet maker.
Yes.
He was one of the favorites. Zaid Jalili was going to be the hand-picked candidate. So Khamenei was not able to engage in election engineering.
آقای تنتر، ولی ما شاهد هستیم علیرغم که این تهدیدات ظاهرا خیلی واضح هستند در رابطه با رژیم حاکم بر ایران، منظورم هم در رابطه با اتمی، فعالیت اتمیش است و هم صدور بنیادگرایی، ولی کماکان می‌بینیم که سیاست غرب و مشخصا آمریکا مماشات با این رژیم هست. چرا؟
Well, I would suggest that the threat from the Iranian regime is greater now because the weaponization process can go forth in secret. Parchin and Home as places for the development of nuclear weapons can take place without the prying eyes of inspectors. The regime is stronger, has more leverage, if you will, on the West to make sure that the heavy water installation in Iraq is allowed to continue. So by 2014, the regime in Iran can develop a second method of using plutonium as a means of getting the bomb.
آیا عدم حمایت آمریکا، دولت آمریکا از قیام‌های مردم ایران من جمله در سال 2009 هم ربط داره به این سیاستی که آمریکا داره ادامه میده به نظرتون؟
I don't think the United States is engaged in appeasing the Iranian regime. President Obama and President Bush before are realists. A realist would prefer to deal with regimes as they are, not as the United States would like them to be.
برخلاف گروه‌های اپوزیسیون در بهار عرب که از فقدان مهارت‌ها و قابلیت‌های اداری امور مملکت خود رنج می‌برند، سازمان مجاهدین خلق ایران چنین مهارتی را در عمل به اثبات رسانده است. همین که صرفاً توانسته در برابر تلاش‌های رژیم برای نابودی آن بقای خود را حفظ نماید، خود بر چنین مهارتی دلالت دارد. اما مضاف بر آن، آنها می توانند به طور سالیانه گردهمایی‌های عظیمی را با شرکت بیش از 100,000 هوادار و مخالف رژیم برگزار کنند. هیچ گروهی از چنین سطحی از حمایت اجتماعی برخوردار نیست. سازمان مجاهدین در صحنه خاورمیانه از موقعیت استراتژیک برخوردار است. رژیم تهران یک بلوک متشکل از نیروهای بنیادگرا از تهران تا بغداد و از دمشق تا بیروت را شکل داده است. اما می‌ترسد که نخست وزیر عراق نوری مالکی را از دست بدهد. اگر اسد در سوریه سقوط کند، احتمال اینکه مالکی اردوی رژیم ایران را ترک کند بالا می‌رود. در اینجا مجاهدین در صحنه سیاسی عراق نقش کلیدی ایفا می‌کنند، اما به شرطی که از محیط زندان کمپ لیبرتی رها شوند. با از بین رفتن رژیم اسد و تغییر شرایط در عراق، شمارش معکوس برای رژیم ایران آغاز خواهد شد. بنابراین منطقی است که آمریکا در راستای تضعیف موقعیت رژیم در کل منطقه با مجاهدین همسو شود. اجازه بدین که حالا از ایران یکم فراتر بریم در منطقه خاورمیانه و کشورهای عربی. به نظر شما تحولات یکی دو سال اخیر چه ریشه ها و عللی داره در کشورها بهار عربی؟
Well, when I started writing the book Arab Rebels and Iranian Dissidents, I thought there were lessons that the people of Iran could learn from the Arab revolts. But then once I got into the research, I thought maybe that direction was going in the opposite way. That is, maybe the Arab revolts were stimulated in part by the Iranian Revolution of 1979, which was led by a moderate mujahideen, which said, if you want to wear the clothing of religion, you can do so, but you're not forced to do so. That religion and state are separate, that you could have a secular democracy, not a religious dictatorship. Those kinds of ideas probably help stimulate the, I don't use the word Arab Spring that you used, the Arab revolts, but I'm not so sure of that. I'd have to look at the data more carefully. And secondly, I feel that the lessons of Europe in 1989 could be a model for the Iranian developments in 2014, because military communist dictatorships fell in 1989 to 1991, and I suspect that the religious dictatorship will go the same way. And thirdly and lastly, for this moment, the book is called Arab Rebels and Iranian Dissidents, because I see a difference between the way the Arab community relates to its rebels. The Iranian dissidents were of long standing since 1979. The expatriate community is split, but not split as the Arab communities are split. You have Iranian dissidents coming together each June around the banner of the Iranian Mujahideen, led by the Parliament in Exile, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, its largest unit, the Mujahideen al-Khalq. And you have 100,000 plus people coming together, which indicates to me that that dissident community is ready to become a revolutionary community, stimulating the Iranian street, just like the Arab rebels were eventually able to revolt against the military autocrats in Tunis, in Cairo, in Damascus, in Tripoli, Libya. So I see that the Arab revolts will take place, but the Iranian revolt of 2014 will not necessarily be sparked by the Arab revolts. But just as I said, all dictatorships must fall because they lack popular support. That is why the Iranian regime will fall. You see, anytime you have a republic in the Middle East, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Syrian Arab Republic, you are inviting a political succession crisis. Why? Because there's no agreed upon method to change the government. And when the leader, Hafez al-Assad, dies, he will want to appoint his son. And his son, Bashar Assad, did become president, but there was a resentment throughout the country against the leadership of Bashar Assad. In Tunisia, Bourguiba was president, then Ben Ali became president. They were two military people. Ben Ali wanted to appoint, I believe, his son-in-law to succeed him. The military then split from Ben Ali appointing his son. That then created at the top the kind of succession crisis that a spark could ignite the fuel, and the Tunisian revolution then was set afire, if you will. That spark, a man being insulted by a policeman in the countryside, would not have had the resounding effect that it had in Tunisia in the context of lack of a split at the top on the issue of succession. Shift over to Egypt. Mubarak wanted to appoint his son to be the head of the country as if he were a pharaoh. And the Egyptian people said no. But it was because of the military didn't want the son to succeed Mubarak that the people could hit Tahrir Square and not be crushed. So I would argue that and then I'll skip, I'm not going to take each one of the Arab revolt countries, but the same kind of situation will happen in Iran because there's no agreed upon method for changing the government. And the last point on this is that in Europe you could say, and in the Arab monarchies, the king is dead, long live the king. What that means is the present king died, but the new king should inherit the leadership role. And therefore, monarchies are inherently more stable than are republics. But when you have a country like Iran, you're going to have a succession crisis. The elite is split now. There will be a split between the regular army and the Pastaran, a split between the Pastaran on one hand and the religious leaders on the other hand. All of these splits are going to allow for are omens of a succession crisis that will allow for a new Neda to be assassinated, and which will be the spark to set the regime on fire, just like it almost did in 2009. But you need the United States to give a green light for people on the Iranian street to hit the street again. They're not going to take the chance in 2014, 15, 16 that they took in 2009 without that kind of green light. And that's why the subtitle of the book is, could you read it?
Yes. It's شورشیان عربی و مخالفین ایرانی.
Right. But then the subtitle at the bottom, yes, it is time that a new landscape, yes, allows for, yes, a change in American policy. The new landscape is the Arab revolt landscape. So.
و شما امیدوارید که این تغییر در سیاست آمریکا وجود داشته باشه، چون ما در رابطه با بهار عرب مشاهده میکنیم یک تغییر سیاستی رو، مثلا فرض کنید اون چی که در مقابل لیبی و تونس عمل شد در مقابل سوریه عمل نمیشه.
Despite you use the term Arab Spring, I will not use it.
Yes, okay.
Because it says revolution, that the outcome will be positive. The spring, that metaphor just doesn't hold.
Yes.
And let me comment on this first before I answer the question directly. Revolutions are often characterized by hard dictators being replaced by harder ones. Think 1789, France Revolution. And Napoleon came in. He was even harder. Think 1848 in France again and various other places. Harder people came into power. Think 1917, Russian Revolution. Stalin came in. Yes. Think 1979, Iran. Khomeini ousted Masoud Rajavi and the Mujahideen. So revolutions often produce negative outcomes, but they don't have to continue to be negative outcomes. One of the things I do in the book is to ask the question, how can you avoid these hard dictators coming in after harder dictators coming in after you oust another dictator. And in this respect, the findings indicate something as follows, that Iran already has its Islamist religious dictatorship. So you don't have to go from Islamist dictator to Islamist dictator. The Iranian Mujahideen can be the source of a coalition because it reflects the will of the people. You have a situation where the will of the people can be expressed around Madame Rajavi's 10-point plan, for example, separation of religion and the state and the like. So I see that political succession crisis on top of the fact that the regime, not just that the regime is split, that's the same point, but on top of the fact that it is time for the people to rise up. Now, the question you asked me, and I'm sorry it takes so long to answer it, do I think President Obama will change his policies? No. Just like President George Herbert Walker Bush didn't change his policy, the 1989 revolutions occurred anyway because the people of Western Europe began to aid their counterparts in Eastern Europe on human rights grounds. This is what has to happen. The American people have to stand up and stand with their Iranian friends, and this is happening. Americans are standing up to be counted, to stand up with the Iranian people. And then President Obama can change his policy based upon the new landscape in the Arab world and the Iranian people standing up for, and the American people standing up for their brothers and sisters in Iran. So this book is well timed for President Obama to read and to learn that eventually he will turn to the Iranian people just like he turned to the Syrian people, the Tunisian people, the Libyan people. In fact, March 19th, 2011, the picture represents the United States President Obama making a decision to join the British and the French with air power to support the Libyan people over the regime. Yeah. That's what that picture represents. And, Mr. President, why wait until there's war to start supporting the Iranian people? Start supporting the Iranian people now rather than waiting till later. That's the argument in the book. Yes.
میخواستم ازتون خواهش کنم بگید که شما از چه زمانی به طور مشخص به بررسی وضعیت مخالفان رژیم حاکم بر ایران پرداختید و بر اساس تحقیقاتی که شما کردید چه تصویری میتونید ارائه کنید از مخالفان رژیم حاکم بر ایران؟
Well, in one of the first books we did at the Iran Policy Committee is the Appeasing the Ayatollahs and Suppressing Democracy book. And we decided to study all of the Iranian opposition groups we could find that had a website that would respond to our email queries or telephone calls. And we discovered that the Iranian regime paid attention to the Iranian Mujahideen groups 350% more than all other opposition groups combined. And so we thought, gee, I wonder if the regime dislikes the Iranian Mujahideen groups more than these other groups. And we found that the regime dislikes the Mujahideen more than all the other groups combined. So we said, maybe this is the group we should study more intensely. We had studied the Iran Participation Front. We had studied the former Shah of Iran's sons group. And we started looking at the meetings that these other groups were having. And we discovered that the Iranian Mujahideen could bring together tens of thousands in New York, tens of thousands in Dortmund, Germany, tens of thousands in Washington, and hundreds of thousands plus in Paris, and the other groups could not. And we said, well, maybe we should compare the Green Movement with the Iranian Mujahideen groups. And we discovered that the Green Movement had no infrastructure. There was no leadership. There was no exile, continuous stream of expatriates who provided the financial and moral support to the Iranians within Iran. And we said, gee, maybe it's that the Iranian Mujahideen is the group we should study the most because they had the greatest expatriate support, and expat support is an indication of support within Iran. So we began to focus mainly on the Iranian Mujahideen. But we didn't start that way. We didn't say, we like the Iranian Mujahideen and therefore we're going to write books that vindicate the Iranian Mujahideen's position. The data began to speak to us. The facts are stubborn and they don't change as a result of our preferences.
خب بر اساس تحقیقاتی که کردین به چه شناختی از مجاهدین رسیدید؟
I think the Iranian Mujahideen are at a turning point. The Iranian Mujahideen has had its groups removed from the proscribed organizations list in London, from equivalent list at the European Union level, from the United States Foreign Terrorist Organizations list, and now it's time for the Iranian Mujahideen to widen its scope and bring in people who oppose the regime but who've been afraid to say so. And that means that people need to boycott elections. They need to be persuaded to join up with the Iranian Mujahideen's position of rejecting clerical rule. Anyone who supports the current regime, anyone who votes in the election, is an implicit acceptance of the Iranian regime. And they have to understand that. Many people don't understand that. They think that they have to express their vote. Well, the people expressed their vote in 2013, and they're getting a regime stalwart, not a regime moderate. You cannot be a moderate and accept the Constitution of Iran, which enshrines Veli Fahi, the supreme leader, as its head. It's not possible. The two things don't square.
برغم توضیحاتی که شما دادید در مورد مجاهدین، ولی رژیم حاکم بر ایران و همچنین برخی گرایش‌ها در غرب معتقدند که مجاهدین حمایت اجتماعی در داخل کشور ندارند و در نتیجه نمیتونن پارامتر مؤثری در آینده ایران باشن. نظرتون چیه در این رابطه؟
Well, as I mentioned, you look at the number of expats that who support the Iranian Mujahideen, and you look at how many people come to rallies of other groups. Other groups don't have expat community support. They just simply don't. Expat community support is an indication of how much support within Iran there is. You look at the fundraising, how much the Iranian Mujahideen can fundraise worldwide, and that is another indication that it has support within Iran. In the call center that's set up in Resistance Television, you see people calling in, making donations, and that again is a support. And you look at the attention that the regime pays to the Iranian Mujahideen. 120 exhibitions throughout Iran took place for a year leading up to the 2013 June elections. Why did the regime pay so much attention to the Iranian Mujahideen? Because the Iranian Mujahideen has an agenda that is attractive to the youth. And therefore, Tehran has to say, these people are worse than we are. And that is the strangest statement that they can make. The Shah used to say this, that the Mujahideen were worse than the Shah. Well, in fact, the Islamists were worse than the Shah. That's that hard revolution business again, people replacing the other ones.
آقای تنتر، شما تو کتابتون نوشتید که کمیته سیاست ایران تحقیق کرده در مورد برنامه 10 ماده خانم رجوی و در واقع عملکرد حقیقی مجاهدین رو با این در واقع مقایسه کرده و به نتایجی دست پیدا کرده. چطور این کار انجام شد در این کمیته و چه نتایجی داشت؟
The Iran Policy Committee looked at the various points in the 10-point plan. Separation of religion and state, for example. And then we looked at the practices of the Iranian Mujahideen organizations. And there is a separation of religion from the organization, from the state, if you will. There's no state. But on the basis of the conversations, the interviews we've conducted, we are convinced that the Iranian Mujahideen would practice this separation of religion and the state. Rule of law. We look at how elections are conducted. When I was at Camp Ashraf, I learned about how the elections are conducted there. I look at the prisons. If in prison, the Iranian Mujahideen are organized around a democratic procedure. If you can be democratic in jail, you can be democratic in Azadi Square.
آقای تنتر، در مورد نقشی که مجاهدین در رابطه با عملکرد صدور بنیادگرای رژیم ایران هم دارن در این کتاب پرداختید. می‌خواستم قدری در این رابطه برامون توضیح بدید.
Yes, the Iranian regime is the leading exporter of international terrorism in the world. And the State Department says this. I'm not saying it. But in fact, we've studied this issue carefully, and the State Department is right. The State Department is not always right. Well, the regime continues to practice terrorism, and it remains on the state sponsors of international terrorism list at the top of the state sponsors of that list. So I don't have to do any further research. There's a consensus on this particular point that Tehran is the leading exporter of international terrorism and terror at home. You look at the number of public executions there are in China, the hangings and so forth, and you look at them in Iran on a per capita basis, Iran far exceeds the per capita death by hanging in contrast to China.
آقای تنتر، در سالگرد قتل عام زندانیان سیاسی در سال 67 در ایران هستیم. شما ارزیابیتون در مجموع تحقیقاتی که در رابطه با رژیم حاکم بیان داشتین از این جنایت و کشتاری که توسط رژیم صورت گرفت چی بود؟ چه اهدافی رو دنبال میکرد؟
Our research, the Brain Policy Committee, looked very carefully at the motivations behind Ayatollah Khomeini. When Ayatollah Khomeini thought he was dying, he said, look, I want to make sure that the revolution lives on. And how can I tell whether the religious-based ideas will live on after my death? And he said, okay, let's have a test. Let's see how many people will continue to follow the Veliyat Fahi if they are part of the slaughter of all of our political appointees in jail. So, and Khomeini gave the order to kill tens of thousands of political prisoners, the most of whom were Iranian Mujahideen. This is one of the most horrific slaughters in the history of Iran. You know, you look at the 1905 to 1911 constitutional revolution, you look at even what the Shah did. There's never been that kind of a slaughter as took place in 1988 in the Iranian prison system. And Ahmadinejad, I gather, was one of those who gave the coup de grace, the last bullet. He became bullets to make sure that the prisoner was dead. So, and he became known as the man of 1,000 bullets. After he killed 1,000 people, he said, that's enough. That's enough. So this idea, Ayatollah Montazeri failed this test. He was not able to, he didn't think it was right, fair, just, religious, to kill unarmed people in order for Khomeini's ideas to go in history. These ideas will go down in history as close to a genocide.
آقای تنتر، شما در سال 2008 سفری هم به عراق داشتید و در اونجا با نمایندگان اقشار مختلف مردم عراق دیدارهای زیادی داشتید. همچنین بازدیدی هم داشتید از شهر اشرف، محلی که مجاهدین در اون ساکن بودن. چه دستاوردهایی داشت این سفر برای شما؟
Yes, I had the most dangerous trip of my life was to come from where I landed and to Camp Ashraf. That road, there were multiple checkpoints. And before I get into the direct question, answering the question you asked, I have to say that this is during the time that Al-Qaeda of Iraq was trying to capture Americans. I'm an American exposing myself along with one of my students who had been in the U.S. military, and we were subject to being killed. And this was my idea to go there in order to test the validity of some of the hypotheses we had about the strength of the Mujahideen. So on the basis of knowledge, not on the basis of my support for the Iranian Mujahideen, I'm not a supporter, I'm a historian, a political scientist of this movement, because this movement is critical for international security, not just for the country of Iran. So my life was in danger, and I got in and out successfully. But the most dangerous part was when a Kurdish guard and an Iranian guard were manning a checkpoint. But I survived that and got back. So now at Camp Ashraf, what did I see? One of the most thrilling parts of Camp Ashraf for me was to see the resilience of the Iranian people manifest in the operations of the different units, Unit 11, and the various other units that produced things. All the suffering that the Iranian Mujahideen have experienced, I find that the Mujahideen became stronger. The suffering at Camp Ashraf was turned into a desert that bloomed. And so I said, this idea cannot be destroyed. And this is what I had read that Montessori had said. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to go for myself, to see whether this kind of suffering could produce a resilient kind of a people. And Montessori was absolutely correct. And one of the things that I enjoyed the most was that I had a dance with the different ethnic groups at Camp Ashraf. And you had the Turkomans, the Kurds, and you had the Arabs. And one of the things that many people don't know is that the Iranian Mujahideen is a collection of minorities as well as Persians. And in fact, I did a study while I was at Camp Ashraf, trying to find out the proportion of individuals from the different ethnic groups. And, how many Kurds are there, how many Iranian Persians are there. And I find that the Iranian Mujahideen is slightly more diverse than Iranian society as a whole. So while I was at Ashraf, I was trying to do research.
Thank you so much for being with us and for this interview. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
تاریخچه سازمان مجاهدین نشان می‌دهد که از میان دسیسه‌های رژیم با هدف نابود کردن آن پیروز بیرون خواهد آمد، چه غرب از نظر سیاسی از آنها حمایت کند و چه نکند. هموطنان عزیز، بینندگان گرامی، سلام بر شما. در برنامه امروزمون گفتگوی اختصاصی داریم با آقای پروفسور ریموند تنتر، عضو پیشین شورای امنیت آمریکا.